Bonjour et soyez le bienvenu. Je suis à Paris. Jambo and warm greetings from Paris, where world leaders are meeting to discuss the devastating impact of global warming on livelihoods across the world. A meeting that remained on course despite a terror attack on November 13 in the city, in which 130 people were killed. This high-profile meeting has been necessitated by the fact that the consequences of global warming can no longer be put on the back burner. The consequences are widening.
Carbon emission is happening, I think, huge volumes actually happening in the first world. But we are the ones who are suffering more than them.
With climate change, there is erratic rainfall, there's increase in droughts, there is increase in flooding, there's increase in soil degradation. There are new diseases and pests which are emerging, which we have never seen before.
At the end of this meeting, leaders hope to overcome past differences and sign a deal that will ensure reduction in emission of greenhouse gases that cause global warming. Also in this show, the role of development partners in Kenya's action plan.
One area that we are also partnering in through our work with the government is to help create innovations in green energy and green technologies.
Our also support has been really preparing the government to have a position when they go to COP21, and also in a way having a discussion around the African position, so that when they go, as an African country, Kenya can speak the same voice as the other African countries.
The United States and Kenya are working very closely, both a policy and a technical level, to address the threat from climate change.
That and more in the show, but first, the highlights of the meeting. The main objective of the conference is for governments to come up with a legally binding and global climate change agreement. The underlying objective is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to limit the global increase in temperature to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Leading to this 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference, countries had been asked by March 2015 to publicly declare what actions they intended to take under a new global agreement. Those national statements will be presented at the conference. There will be a high-level meeting of heads of state and government, among them President Barack Obama of the US. Kenya will be represented by President Uhuru Kenyatta. Also to give their voices are members of the civil society, NGOs, environmentalists, agriculturalists, among others. The need for use of renewable, or what is known as clean energy, will feature prominently at the meeting. Participants will be discussing mitigation and adaptation to climate change, with climate-sensitive areas like forestry, agriculture, wildlife, and transport high on the agenda. You are in time for this special show right from here in Paris about the ongoing talks about the devastating impact of climate change. Time now to look into what is at stake for Kenya. Climate change is a complex problem which, although environmental in nature, has consequences for all.
Climate change is a reality, and it's a global phenomenon. In fact, we are now entering what we call the global warming casino. 50 years ago, so many of us thought that climate change is a myth, thought that it was something that is happening in other parts of the world and does not affect us. But there is now convergence, and there is total agreement globally that the world has warmed in the last 10 decades than ever before. And we are therefore seeing the vagaries of climate change affecting particularly the developing countries and Africa.
Kenya is located in the Greater Horn of Africa region, which is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. More than 80% of the country's landmass is arid and semi-arid land, with poor infrastructure and other developmental challenges. Secondly, Kenya's economy is highly dependent on climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture that is mainly rain-fed. The consequences of global warming in this sector are worrying.
We used to have rains during the long rains, and also we used to have the short rains. They were predictable. We could even tell the exact date they're going to start. Today, we're experiencing erratic rainfalls, and therefore our food security is actually seriously threatened.
For example, tea is our main export crop. It is one of those which are very vulnerable to climate change. For example, in tea, there's a lot of effect of hailstones destroying the tea. There's effects of frost. There are effects of new pests and diseases. There's a lot of erosion because the land is open where the tea is grown.
Pastoralists in the north parts of this nation are experiencing very severe droughts continuously. And indeed, we think that pastoralism as an industry, as an economy, probably will, if there will be no interventions, will become extinct. We are also affected by climate change on our wildlife. Tourism is the backbone of this country's economy, and wildlife is also affected by this. Because of continuous drought, they don't get enough forage, they don't get enough space, and therefore it's also a serious phenomenon that is facing us.
Resources that are geared towards development, are now into emergency, are routed to emergency. So meaning that, the development processes are slowed down, but also in terms of the damage that it has on the economic growth, it's estimated that, if nothing is done, Kenya, for example, would be losing 1.2 billion Kenyan shillings every year to flooding. So this is a tremendous drawback for the country.
The other factor is that Kenya strives to be a newly industrialized middle-income country by 2030. This development is expected to increase emissions from the energy sector. Therefore, the need for a plan that will enhance climate-resilient development. The government's low-emission and climate-resilient development project under the Ministry of Environment is the focal point of that strategy.
We would like to support those innovations that have got very minimal emission of gases that contribute to global warming. And the government of Kenya supported the setting up of the climate change resource center for this country, whereby as a project through the ministry, we are supporting its operationalization, especially more for the knowledge management platform. We would like this to be operational, which will be a one-stop shop in terms of knowledge and information that is relevant to climate change.
Kenya is among the developing nations whose contribution to global warming is negligible. It will be joining other nations that are calling upon industrialized nations to pump more resources into mitigation and adaptation projects.
Why we have never succeeded on issues of climate change is because of climate change is actually an externality. And what we talk about externality is that you produce a product, or you utilize a product, and it causes harm to somebody who is actually a bystander. And therefore, we know very well that the first world has contributed, greatly to the climate situation in the world, and it's important for them also to compensate those who are actually affected by this. And I think Paris will be an opportunity really to correct this problem.
When it comes to show of commitment, Kenya was among the first nations to present their action plans ahead of the Paris conference.
What we have done is to really ensure that we find renewable energy as alternatives, to hydro, so that we can actually reduce, use of hydro energy to power our homes and also to power our industries. And that's why we have a deliberate effort really to ensure that we produce geothermal, and I think we have done very well. I think in the past couple of years, and as we speak now, almost 58% of our electricity is actually from geothermal. We have gone further, in using solar energy, And we are expanding this, across our country. We know that the ASAL regions, has a substantial amount of light, and they can actually have solar, to power most of their businesses, and this is clean energy. Similarly, we are today proud as a nation that we have the largest wind power facility, or wind farm in Kenya, and this also will produce substantial amount of energy. We are also looking at the enhancing efficiencies, in our energy and resource use across different sectors. And what we are saying is that even issues of the rail, issues of rapid bus, initiatives, we need to actually introduce it so that we can actually, reduce traffic congestion, and also emissions, on our roads.
Threats are varied and very much dependent on the kinds of landscapes and physical built infrastructure that we see in different parts of Kenya, which is why it's incredibly important that county level planning take place. One of the goals of our program with the Ministry of Environment is actually to support better modeling at the county level for climate forecasts and to integrate climate change planning into the county integrated development plans. So that information, for example, would help inform what kinds of agriculture would be developed in certain counties, what kinds of infrastructure are going to be required under certain types of future climate scenarios. Is hydropower viable in certain counties? These are the kinds of things that the decision makers at the county level really need to consider, particularly for long-term investments in infrastructure. But I would say agriculture is the most important thing in Kenya because the economy is so dependent on it, both at a macro level and at a community and household level.
Still to come.
Anyone who drives a vehicle is actually contributing to greenhouse gases.
Burning of plant residue after harvesting of maize or crops like that, we burn them. We contribute to the destruction of the ozone layer.
Right after the break.